Please welcome junior Serena Bujtor and her story of struggle and, more importantly, strength.
Around 2 months ago, I was put to the task of writing a rough draft for SF Talks, a talk that is so outside my comfort zone that standing here today is absolutely terrifying. Don't worry, it's not you, it's me. You guys are not scary people. I'm just a scared person. To give you guys some context on what my battle with mental illness is like, I'm going to tell you guys the process it took for me to write this speech. For a lot of people, writing a speech is hard, but doable. For me, writing the speech was a battle. Often, many things are more difficult with depression, as it takes an immense amount of extra energy for me to complete a task compared to my friends and fellow classmates. When I applied to present this talk, I was so excited. All of my excitement seemed to disappear, though, by the time I started to write. I had little natural motivation to write, so I had to create all of my motivation from scratch. During winter break, when I was supposed to be creating the first draft, I made no progress. My mind was just stuck in a cycle of chaos. I spent many days of that break crying over writing the talk. I believed that no matter what I wrote, it would still be awful. I just kept digging myself more and more into my depressed and anxious thoughts. On Tuesday morning, the first day back from break, I thought I had this all under control. I felt that I could now write and that everything would be okay. The talk felt so in my control that I thought it was no big deal, so I chose not to bring it up in conversation with my therapist during my weekly appointment. Thinking back to it, I realized that I was in denial in that moment. I forced myself to believe that was all okay because I gave myself no option for it not to be. When the sky got dark that day, so did my thoughts. I was so angry at how I could not complete a seemingly easy task of writing a rough draft. As it turns out, I was not in control. That night, I could not sleep. All the thoughts surrounding SF Talks were keeping me awake. I kept thinking about how excited I was to finally be sharing my experiences with a mental illness and how proud people were of me. I felt guilt that I was letting everyone down at the moment because I could not write. The next morning, I woke up paralyzed. My body was glued to my bed and my breath was constricting. My parents entered my room and tried to convince me to get ready for school. I mean, how hard could the day be? It was just the second day back from break. I dragged myself out of bed, only to collapse on the floor. My negative thoughts made their advance, and I was pelted with all the terrible what-ifs that could happen. I fell in surrender with my mind. It became apparent to my parents and me that I was not going to school that day, as my mom walked into my room, only to be greeted with the sight of me sobbing while crouched in a ball on my bedroom floor. I wish I could say that was the first time she walked into one of my mental breakdowns. At that moment, I thought it was painfully obvious that I was not giving that talk. I stayed home from school that day and called my therapist, ranting to her about how overwhelmed it was making me and how I just had to give up. My therapist listened. Then, after I paused, she reminded me of how much this talk really meant to me. She told me that if I stopped now, I would be so frustrated with myself for giving up so early. She was right. So I pushed through, and here I am, giving my talk in front of all of you wonderful people. During one of the first workshops for this talk, Kristen Link, our speaking coach, told us to write about a scar, not a wound. I signed up for SF Talks thinking I'd be presenting a scar, when in fact, it was still a wound. I quickly realized just a little bit into the process that my struggle with mental illness is still here and is as painful as ever. It bleeds out when I feel sad for days and lack the motivation to do anything, even just to eat. It burns when my memory fades and when concentrating on a task seems like a goal on its own. It digs into my skin when I feel immense, constricting fear just from talking out loud in class, or going to the teacher for help. The symptoms of depression started in 5th grade. They were dark and confusing. It was difficult for 11-year-old me to figure out why I could not be as happy as my classmates. I thought I was such a weirdo for not getting excited for fun events like birthday parties and hangouts. My middle school years were filled with feelings of loneliness and numbness. I spent many hours trying to figure out this problem, Googling my symptoms and praying to God for the answers. I did this all on my own. I never asked anyone for help because I was absolutely terrified to tell people about what was going on in my head. During this time, I perfected my act of being okay. I created the perfect act of happiness and wore it whenever anyone was around. In my mind, I thought that no one would like me if I was not happy. So I stuffed all of my negative feelings inside and refused to show anyone anything but a smile. Turns out, mental illnesses are really hard to battle alone. I was quickly deteriorating as my symptoms were worsening and I did not have the tools to combat them. Life was hopeless. I kept watching everything fall apart with no hope of it coming back together again. During one night in 8th grade, I found myself sitting on my bathroom floor, wondering if the bottle of pills in my hand could take all of my pain away. That was the moment I realized I needed help. A couple nights after that incident, I gathered the courage to write my mom a letter, explaining to her all that was going on in my brain. I wrote that letter because I could not bear to tell her in person, because I felt that she would be ashamed of me. She wasn't. The next morning, she calmly approached me and talked to me about what was in that letter. We both decided that was a good idea for me to see a therapist. When I went to the therapist, I was officially diagnosed with depression and anxiety. For years, I viewed having a mental illness as a weakness. Often, I would pretend my negative feelings did not exist. This was not helpful, as it just caused me to hurt more. As it turns out, contrary to some people's popular beliefs, happiness is not always a choice. I still have a lot of pain buried within me from the years of ignoring it previously. Occasionally, I still find myself feeling ashamed of my depression and anxiety. I still lie and put on the front that everything is great. To help me cope with my feelings, I joined a teen therapy group 3 years ago. It is probably one of the most chaotic therapy groups ever, as there rarely is an agenda to it, and we never fill out those coping strategy worksheets that mental health professionals seem to love. During this group, we snack on store-bought cookies and go around the room to just share about how our week is going. We support each other and make a space for each of us to rant about everything that went well in our week and the stuff in our week that could have gone better. In this group, I'm not allowed to hide my feelings. They know me so well that whenever I say, "It's okay," to something that is really not okay, they pelt me with pillows. This is just an example of how it sometimes takes a team to support you on your way to healing. I'm not here today to tell you that every wound turns into a scar and that everything will get better. I mean, it is true, I will eventually heal, and these wounds will scar over. Instead, I'm standing here today to show you that it is okay to have wounds. I spent so much time trying to cover up my mental illnesses, time which I could have spent focusing on recovery. I'm getting better, but I'm not healed yet. I'm not okay, and that is okay. I'm still in the process of accepting my pain. In fact, this speech is a key part of my journey of self-acceptance. I'm showing you my wounds today and hope that one day you guys can have the courage to show yours. Thank you.